أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثا فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا غربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وذل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئنا لمبعوثون أو آباؤنا الأولون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى ميقات يوم معلوم ثم إنكم أيها الضالون المكذبون لآكلون من شجر من زقوم فمالئون منها البطون فشاربون عليه من الحميم فشاربون شرب الهيم هذا نزلهم يوم الدين نحن خلقناكم فلولا تصدقون أفرأيتم ما تمنون أأنتم تخلقونه أم نحن الخالقون نحن قدرنا بينكم الموت وما نحن بمسبوقين على أن نبدل أمثالكم وننشئكم فيما لا تعلمون ولقد علمتم النشأة الأولى فلولا تذكرون أفرأيتم ما تحرثون أأنتم تزرعونه أم نحن الزارعون لو نشاء لجعلناه حطاما فظلتم تفكهون إنا لمغرمون بل نحن محرومون أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا فلولا تشكرون أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أأنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم أنكم تكذبون فلولا إذا بلغت الحلقوم وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون ونحن أقرب إليه منكم ولكن لا تبصرون فلولا إن كنتم غير مدينين ترجعونها إن كنتم صادقين فأما إن كان من المقربين فروح وريحان وجنة نعيم وأما إن كان من أصحاب اليمين فسلام لك من أصحاب اليمين وأما إن كان من المكذبين الضالين فنزل من حميم وتصلية جحيم إن هذا لهو حق اليقين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بمحمد وآل محمد صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں خیمے جلے اور سجاد کے دی کفنی تمہارا کوئی نہیں. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں. دیکھو اے بھائی میں زہرا کی جائی لاشے پہ آئی ہوں بے پردہ ہو کر مارا گیا ہے عباس غازی قاسم دلہارا کوئی نہیں. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں. بے کس یتیموں کا قافلہ بھائی تو ہی بتا دے کہاں لے کے جاؤں. لاشیں سنبھالو یا کنبے کو دیکھو غم کا کنارہ کوئی نہیں. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں. ویرا ہے خیمے خالی ہے جھولا تشنا سکینہ کے کس کو دیکھوں. گر کر ہوئی چور بے آس بیٹی اب تو سہارا کوئی نہیں. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں. کری الجواں کی میت ہے آئی کہتی ہے لیلا اے میرے اکبر کس کی نظر تم کو کھا گئی ہے میرا سہارا کوئی نہیں. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں. بولی یوں رو کے زہرا کی جائی کرب و بلا میں گر لٹ گیا ہے مارا گیا ہے اے اب میرا بھائی وارث ہمارا کوئی نہیں. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں. کہتی تھی کبرا اے میرے دلہا کس کے سہارے اب میں جیوں گی حیف ہے جینا تم جو نہیں ہو باپ نہ بھائی کوئی نہیں. لاشے پہ زینب رو کے پکاری بھیا ہمارا کوئی نہیں. خیمے جلے اور سجاد قیدی کفنی تمہارا کوئی نہیں. محمد و محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sayyid Hasan Rizvi, respected elders, brothers, sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all the names listed on the screen in Kul Arwahil Mu'mineen wal Mu'minat, Sawab al-Fatiha. Ayat-e Yujibun is requested for all the names listed on the screen and whoever is in need of it here and elsewhere. Let us all recite it together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amman yujibul muztarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su. Amman yujibul muztarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Tonight's niyaz distribution will happen when you're exiting the property as you're driving out. Now let us invite Sayyid to come forward reciting for tonight's majlis par Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad salawat.
رحم الله من قال الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين الخيرين الفاضلين السيدين الصادقين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لترابه مقدمه الفداء ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A companion once came to our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad wa and he said to him, he said, this month, hada shahr, is Shahrul Rajab. This month is the month of Rajab. He asks him, in this month, teach me a dua that will lead to Allah gifting me and blessing me with things that will benefit me. Teach me a dua which will be beneficial for me. Teach me a special dua in this month that will cause and lead to Allah granting me these blessings. So the Imam replies to him. He says he took a piece of paper or a tablet and a writing utensil. And he said, first write Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. He wrote that down. And then he gave him the instructions. He said, this dua that I'm about to teach you for the month of Rajab, recite it every day in Rajab, mornings and evenings and after every salah. And this is where the Imam begins to recite the famous dua, Ya man arjuhu likulli khair. Among the different a'mal in the month of Rajab, this one is one that we've gotten very used to because of the fact that it's recited after every salah. We try to do that when we had previously been open in the center and had our prayers over here. In the month of Rajab, I'm sure all of you remember, people have been assigned after every single Jama'ah prayer, and we would have been reciting it. There's a lot of interesting concepts to discuss in this dua. Now normally, although we are commemorating the Shahadat of an Imam tonight, basically there was two options that were in front of us. One of them was that, look, we have a Shahada tonight, we will have various wiladat and other Shahadat coming in this holy month. We will have various days, the day of Bi'atha and Mi'raj. There's so many events going on. Normally what we do is on that event, we try just to talk about that personality or what event took place and just, describe one part of it in, to some detail. I thought of maybe taking a different direction this time and rather using the whole month of Rajab and all of the various events that we'll be gathering for, which will be multiple times a week, at least, right? I don't think there's any week where it's only going to be a Thursday night. Every week, though, there should be a minimum of maybe 2 or 3 events. I thought this would also be a good time to start a new series as well. In the same way that we had started a series about a commentary on one of the sermons of Bibi Zainab, alayha salam, we thought that here, in the month of Rajab, why not try to approach something very practically for us? Rather than 1 or 2 little pieces of information from this Imam or Bibi Zainab or Imam Ali or Imam Musa al-Kadhim, whoever it happens to be, whatever day it is, why don't we take a continuous series for the whole month of Rajab, offer a commentary on this dua, because it's going to be something that we will be, hopefully, inshallah, reciting every single day. As we'll start going night by night, as we get together, we'll start to move through each and every line. Hopefully, the conclusion and the benefits will be that when we recite it, now if you haven't read the translation before, this will give you a good excuse to at least know the translation now. If you've seen the translation, or if you've read it before, or you read it alongside when you recite the Arabic, now hopefully with some added commentary, this will give a whole new layer and a deeper dimension to it when you recite it. Because normally when we start adding more information, more layers to whether it's tafsir of Quran, whether it's a commentary on a dua or a ziyada, that enhances our connection. And hopefully in this month of Rajab, where we want to try to increase our spirituality and prepare ourselves for the month of Sha'ban and then of course the month of Ramadan, this we can use as an opportunity every single day after every single salah of trying to get closer to Allah through this wonderful dua which has been passed to us from our sixth Imam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The first thing I want to talk about is the actual method of recitation. Now, this is not like any normal dua, right? Normal dua, mustahab thing is, you just put your hands up and then you recite the dua. That's it, right? Over here, as I'm sure many of you remember, there's a beginning part of the dua, right? Ya man arjuhu likulli khair, up until the end. And then at some point is when it starts, Ya dhal jalali wal ikram. And then from there, the dua, the instructions change. I'm sure most of you remember that when we recite this last part, starting with Ya dhal jalali wal ikram, what is the recommended thing to do? Hasan. So it's recommended to, not grab your mic, to grab your, if you have a beard, for ladies you're excused obviously, you grab your beard and then you're supposed to move your finger back and forth, your right finger back and forth. So I'm going to clear up a few misconceptions there. So sometimes I've seen individuals move their hand or move their whole arm. Now, it's not haram, it's not going to break the dua if you do that, but what is specifically listed is that it's just the index finger that's supposed to move back and forth. That's it. So nothing else should really be moving and shaking. The other part is this, and this is something that I had actually only heard and learned from some of our most esteemed teachers in Qom. And this came directly from some of the students of Allama Tabatabai, rahmatullah alayh. And they said that we actually have been even doing that part incorrectly. You see, the way that it's mentioned in the narration is very, very confusing. And that's why I wanted to mention it to you in the beginning of how this dua comes to us. This companion, a very famous one actually, he comes and he asks the Imam. He asks him for something beneficial, something that will cause Allah to give him manfa'ah and blessings and beneficial things in his life. Then the Imam says first, okay, start writing Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and then he begins the dua. And then in that actual narration, at some point, that narrator, the Rawi himself says, I saw the Imam grabbing his beard, and then he was moving his right index finger back and forth. So this is normally the way that people have been explaining it. And normally when you see the translation for the instructions, that's what it is. So our esteemed ulama, some of them at least, in Qom said this is not the right way to do it. And in the manuscript, there's been a sort of scribal error. Now what happened is this. What our ulama, some of them claim, is that this method is actually supposed to be done for the whole dua. Meaning, the claim of some of the students of Allama Tabatabai was that during the whole dua, from the Bismillah, the Imam was holding his beard and moving his finger, right index finger, back and forth. And some ulama even go further than that. They say, basically, because of the shadid, the intense nature of this dua, normally, again, the Imam would probably have his hands in the air. But instead, he was, because of the intense nature, was with his left hand holding his beard, and with only his right hand was his hand in the air. Because of his intense emotions, his connections, his humility, his khushu, his finger was kind of shaking on its own. Right? So that's what the person who was writing this down, he noticed that. So what we're seeing is this narrator noticing what the Imam is doing throughout the whole dua, but only listing it kind of in order at the end. He's like, oh, and now I just noticed what the Imam is doing, although the Imam was doing this the whole time. So So this is the opinion of some of our ulama. So based on their instructions, they say from the beginning of the dua is where you should be holding your beard, if you have it, in your left hand, and be moving your finger back and forth of your right hand. And again, some will say that it actually should be not sideways or rested here, but you should actually be holding it up as if you are actually reciting a dua. And the finger movement, now of course, you and I, we do it because we're instructed to do so. It's mustahab. But just remember that this is because, according to some commentators, this is because of the intense emotional connection that the Imam had with Allah, right? That his hands, where his finger at least was shaking. And this is what the commenter, the Rawi, had noticed. Now, however you decide to, recite it, the way that you've been doing it before, the kind of ways that I've been describing it now, based on the students of Alama Tabatabai and some of the other commentators, that's up to you, right? Again, it's a mustahab dua. You don't have to take it super seriously. It's not a big deal. But I wanted to offer just kind of some background into the dua that we may not have heard before. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So now, with the few minutes that we have left for tonight, let's start with the first line and begin. So the first line, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya man arjuhu likulli khair. So first, the sort of Shakespearean translation, right? O one whom I'm hopeful towards for all good, right? For all khair. So the arjuho is coming from the word raja, right? Arju is the first person verb from the original verb raja, which means I am seeking hope in somebody or something, right? So we are calling out to this entity that we are putting hopes for, all of our hopes for, in terms of what's good. The first thing we need to figure out is this. Now, we're all familiar with the idea of having hopes, right? That's being hopeful of something or not being hopeful of something. Sometimes we have positive hopes. Sometimes they're very general. Sometimes we have negative hopes towards something. And sometimes that negative hope might be very general and universal. And sometimes that might be very, very specific. So examples, right? Contemporary ones. We might be hopeful that world hunger and poverty ends, right? That's a hope that some of us may have. It's very, positive and also very general. We also might be very specific and say that, I hope that the fuqara and those who are struggling in the community, I really hope that Allah takes care of their needs and their hajat, right? That's now a bit more specific. Or you can go even more specific. I am hopeful that Allah takes care of what I need right now. And again, very, very specific. And I'm sure all of us have something. Maybe, as we've been seeing in our WhatsApp groups and things, a lot of us are very hopeful for our parents or grandparents, or if you're at that age, trying to secure an appointment for a vaccine, right, for COVID. So this is a hope that a lot of people have, that they want to get both doses and kind of move on from that to give them some new sense of security, right? And of course, for everybody else, in addition to that, we're trying to look for and hopeful towards an end to the pandemic and going back to the way, hopefully, things were. Or, let's put it, better than things were. Sometimes, unfortunately, though, our hopes are negative. They're not that positive. Instead of trying to end world hunger or hoping for, peace or something like that, you have some individuals who have very negative hopes. They may say something or hope for something, they probably won't say it out loud, although some people do, is, I hope all individuals of so-and-so area die. I hope that this race dies off or is unsuccessful, right? A racist person may say something like that. We have certain fundamental extremist atheists who say that they're hopeful, they hope that all religious people, get wiped off of the map because they think that believing in religion is the worst thing for humanity right now. So they have these sort of negative hopes. Now for them it's positive, but obviously for the other individuals it's very negative. Sometimes our negative hopes might be directed towards somebody and be very negative, right? We may, instead of hoping that everybody gets a vaccine or everybody is part of the end to the pandemic, we may say, this person, they're not observing proper social distancing, they don't wear their mask, they're disrespectful. I hope they get corona, and I hope they get this so they learn a lesson. It's a very negative way to, have a hope in somebody. So we all have this familiar, intimate relationship with hopes. But the question is this. In Islamic language, in the Arabic language that we're talking about, right? Yaman arjuhu. Arju meaning raja. Is raja the same thing as all of these types of hopes that you and I may have in our lives? Or when we're talking about raja, is there something very specifically intended within the Islamic Arabic language? So that'll be our first discussion, inshallah. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So this word, raja, is a word that I think most of us are familiar with, right? It's an Arabic Islamic term that most of us have heard, usually in terms of the fact that we hear it of that a mu'min or a person should always be between khawf and raja, right? Between fear and hope. Now here's the issue. Normally when you see the translation, as I'm sure for this dua you saw it, or in ziyarat sometimes it comes, or in other du'as it shows up, or in the Quran as well. It's usually translated as hope. But we have other words that have also been translated as hope in Arabic. What about amal? Not amal with an ayn, amal with a hamza or alif at the beginning. If you look at that, you'll also see that being translated as hope or desire or wish. If you look at the word irada, I have an irada for something. That also sometimes is translated as, desire or hope or wish. What about a term that maybe you and I are not familiar with, something called tam', ta, mim, ayn. Tam' is usually translated as greed, but isn't that also a sort of hope as well, right? If somebody is greedy for money or greedy for power, well, they're also hopeful towards it too. So is there a difference between raja and khawf? Is there a difference between raja and amal and also tam', meaning this sort of greed? What are the differences between these different words? So I want to try to make it very simple for us, right? Amal, with the alif or hamza at the beginning, right? Hamza, mim, lam, amal. It comes in many narrations and it comes in the Quran a few times as well. When amal is there, the sort of caveat here is that yes, it is a hope. There's a part of it it's an expectation that you have. You're anticipating something. But the anticipation and expectation is for something that's very far away. It's very, very hard to achieve. So much so that the scholars of Arabic say that this is used for something that is so distant that it's almost unachievable. You're not going to be able to get it. So it's usually used in that sense. So many ahadith, when it's talking about the dunya, and for example, the Imam say, don't chase after the dunya, don't hope for the dunya, they use this word. Don't have an amal, la tu'mal fi dunya. Don't have this hope and desire in the dunya because it's something that you're always going to be chasing after. You will never be able to achieve the dunya. Another narration which comes from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, لِكُلِّ أَمَلْ غُرُورٌ. For every amal, for every, not just hope, but for every delusional hope, for every hope which is outside of your reach, it comes with what? Ghurur. Confusion, an illusion. There's some sort of trick there. The reason that we get caught up in the dunya and we chase after it, and think the reason we think we can obtain it is because there's something that's come in the way that's fooled us into thinking that we're actually able to achieve it. So if a person thinks that they can actually have proper happiness here while sacrificing their akhirah, not both, but sacrificing their akhirah so they can have dunya. So this is going to be a problem. They think they're going to be happy and it'll never happen. They can chase money, they can chase physical objects, and it won't happen. And you all know the statistics. You know that the highest rates of mental health disorders, of stress, of taking pills and things like that is in the first world countries. It's in places with the highest GDP growth, where people are richer. And there seems to be a specific number too that once you hit an income value and go beyond that, you actually don't get happier or more content, you actually lose that value. So these same concepts tie there. The dunya is something that, we know it's fleeting, it's going away. It's meant to be destroyed and annihilated. So when you seek after something like that, that is called amal. That's called a false hope because you're going after a mirage. You'll never ever obtain it. So that's the first one. The second one now we want to talk about is greed. Tam', ta, mim, ayn. So over with greed and tam' as well, there is also an expectation. There's also an anticipation, right? If somebody's greedy for money or power, you anticipate and you want it. You want that money to come to you. Now the difference between this greed, tam' and amal, we said amal is something that you're not going to be able to achieve. It's far away. You're probably never going to get it. And you're going to be deceived into thinking you can get it. With tam' and greed, The difference here is that it's actually very, very close. The way that it's described is that it's within hand's reach. So, for example, when we say greedy for money, it's usually because the individual, within their business or with their investments or in their dealings, whatever it is, because they're able to, enact certain trade or principle or sales or whatever, they can go after it very easily. So it's not a big deal. Another example would be being greedy for food, right? And therefore ending up overeating. Usually that greed is going to come when all of that food is right at your doorstep, right at your fingertips. If there's, let's say, a whole pie of pizza, right? You can, let's say, maybe get full in reality from maybe 2-3 slices, maybe, right? Depending on it. Now, because of that greed to want to eat more, that love for that feeling, well, all the slices are still there. You can go ahead and do it. And this is the problem that happens to every single one of us in the month of Ramadan. Not every single one of us, but a lot of us. We know that we don't actually need to. We discussed this a few Ramadans ago, actually. It's actually a mental trick. We don't need to eat 20 plates of food, but because of that greed to want to eat as much as possible, we end up eating all this, try to eat all this food. We feel like garbage afterwards, right? It ruins our body system. Whatever benefits we could have had from the fast, we lose altogether. But why? It's easy for us to do. We have that greed. I want that food. I don't want anybody else to get it. So because there's easy access there, this is the difference between tam', greed, and amal and hope. Amal it's far away, you can't achieve it, it's very difficult, but greed in tam' is right at your fingertips. Now, so let me share with you, I guess, another narration, again, from Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa where he says, Al-abd hurrun ma qani' wal-hurru abdun ma tami'. So, a slave becomes free whenever they learn to become satisfied and content. A slave becomes free, becomes freed, earns their freedom once they become satisfied and content with everything and anything. But the other side, a free person becomes a slave when they end up being greedy for everything. So that greed or that contentment are these two things which are always fighting, right, within us. Sometimes we can be content with the amount of money we have, the house we have, the job we have, everything in our life. We can be content. Greed is another disease which can actually make us enslaved. And many of us probably have this idea in our mind. We know what it feels like to be enslaved, especially those of us who may be involved in investments, especially with what is going on right now. It can be very, very fortuitous, right, and very tempting to, do certain things and play the market a certain way right now, even though maybe the amount that you've made and are making is good enough. But that extra little risk factor, because of that extra amount you want, and I'm not saying that this is always the case, I'm just giving some examples which may apply to some of us, that extra amount and that extra push may be for greed. You might be going beyond your means. And what happens is, when you actually lose out, and let's say, you take a big hit, then you're gonna feel. Then you're gonna feel like, you actually feel pain there. But if somebody's actually satisfied, they're content with what they have, even if they actually do, let's say, add another investment, for example, because they're already satisfied with what they are, even if they lose a big amount, they're like, well, you know what? I already had enough. I was already satisfied. And even with the results, I'm also going to be satisfied. So they won't feel that pressure and that burden anymore. But now the question is this. What exactly is Raja? What is the difference between Raja and these other two concepts? Raja sits between these two ideas. It sits between greed, tam', and it sits between amal and this far-fetched pipe dream hope. Because Raja is something where you have an anticipation, you have an expectation, but it's for whatever is khair. What you're expecting and what you're anticipating is for what is beneficial and good for you. That's the difference. And on top of that, it has to be something that is possible. It can't be completely out of your reach, and it can't be something that's right at your footsteps. It has to be something which is kind of in between. You can achieve it, but maybe it'll take a little bit of extra work. Now, what exactly does that mean to kind of take in and put in a little extra work? Because sometimes when we think about having hopes, especially in the month of Rajab, the month of mercy, we have very interesting understandings about the sort of things we're supposed to hope in. For example, we might think that it's really good to have a hope that Allah forgives us. Yeah, that seems like it's a good hope. It seems like that would be an instance of Raja, right? Being forgiven by Allah is a good thing. And we know that Allah is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. He's the most forgiving. He's the most loving and all that. So shouldn't I hope for Allah to forgive me? Okay, maybe, but not in every single instance. Sometimes we might be deluding ourselves. And one example we have from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. A companion came to him once, explaining some of the so-called followers. And he says, Inna qawman min mawalik yulamuna bil ma'asi. So a group of individuals who claim to be your mawali, your followers, your supporters, in other words, your Shia, they say they support you, right, to the sixth Imam. They are constantly committing sins. They're constantly involved in committing sins. وَيَقُولُونَ نَرْجُ. So they commit sins, and at the same time they say, but we're hopeful. Meaning, we're hopeful that God's going to forgive us. And I'm sure many of us, we have that same idea, right? That, I know I do sins, I perform sins, I'm not a ma'asum, I'm not perfect, but Allah's going to forgive me, it's not a big deal. So sometimes we end up just continuing on because we have this faith, quote unquote, that Allah will forgive, it's not a big deal. Look at how the Imam responds. The Imam replies, فَقَالَ, the Imam says, كَذَّبُوا. They are liars, they've lied. لَيْسُوا لَنَا بِمَوَالٍ. They are not our supporters, they're not our followers. Meaning, if you have this belief system that you think you can continually sin and hope for God's forgiveness, with that attitude, you're not a Shia. You're not a follower of the Imam. This is what the Imam is saying. أُولَٰئِكَ قَوْمٌ تَرَجَّحَتْ بِهُمُ الْأَمَانِ. This group of individuals, what's really happened is that these hopes that they have actually caused them to deviate and to destroy and ruin their lives. That's what's happened here. They haven't benefited from this sense of hope. They've actually ruined their akhirah because of this. Because they think that they can have hope in Allah's forgiveness while continually sinning. And then the Imam, he finishes this part by saying, Man raja shay'a. If you actually have raja in something, if you actually hope for something, you anticipate and expect something khair, then what? Amila lahu. You have to put in the effort. You have to act. You have to do something to try to obtain it. وَمَنْ خَافَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. And if you're afraid of something, if you have khawf, then what? هَرَبَ مِنْهُ. Then you would run and flee and escape from that thing. So what's now the second part of our idea about raja and also khawf? It's not just anticipation and expectation and not just in the kind of feeling that you have inside. It's not also about looking for what is good, or in the case of fear, something that is bad. But we all have to be able to put in the effort to match up what we hope for. If I hope for this month of Rajab to be beneficial for me, I need to start doing something. As we mentioned on Thursday, we can try to offer up and have a more reconciliatory attitude, right? To make this a month where, in terms of other ibadat, like reciting this dua after every salah, we can also now try to maintain and strengthen relationships between family, friends, and other community members, right? We need to be the one who takes that step forward. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, to wrap up there. Khawf then is what? Khawf is an expectation and anticipation for something bad and harmful, which is possibly going to happen, and you do your best, you put in the effort to avoid it, right? You take the steps necessary to get away from it. So if you have khawf, if you're in fear of Allah's wrath, His ghadab, if you're in fear of Allah's adab and punishment, if you're in fear of hellfire, if you're in fear that when you die, you may not be in that same daraja and maqam as the Ahlul Bayt, and you may be on a very low level of heaven, if that's a fear for you, for a real fear, then that means you have to run away from everything that'll keep you away from that. You have to put in the effort and flee completely from anything which will cause you harm to your mind, body, and soul. On the other hand, raja is the opposite. It's an expectation and anticipation for something good, for khair, for what is beneficial, which is possible to obtain. It's within, arm's length. It's not that close, but we can actually get it. Allah has given us the ability to achieve it, and we have an inclination towards it. We want to do it. And now, in order for that raja to manifest, we have to take the steps necessary. A mu'min will always have these fixed, sort of focused directions towards what they want in their life. Whether it's their hopes and fears, right? They're always going to know exactly what they're going after. And this seems to be one of our main issues, right? Sometimes we have fear in things, we have hope in things, but we don't know how to direct it properly. We don't know which way we're supposed to orient ourselves. What should I be hopeful for and of, and what should I be in fear of? And this is now where we want to tie back to the first line of this dua. Ya man arjuhu likulli khair. We're calling out to somebody. We're trying to recognize Allah as what? First, the connection is this. What the Imam seems to be saying is that, look, if you are looking for blessings and benefits in this month of Rajab, the first thing you need to do is set your sights on Allah. But not any version or understanding of Allah, not just any perspective you and I may have, but the perspective, and to change your perspective such that you recognize that without a shadow of a doubt, Allah is the absolute source of all khair. If you can have that in your mind, then this dua is meant for you to recite. And this is also why perhaps the beginning is a call. It's saying, Ya man arjuhu likulli khair. It's calling out to the one who, hopefully, I have hope towards for all khair. Now, the first thing that it can call our attention to is, look, do I actually think of God being the source of all khair? Or do I think that, I sort of randomly, abstractly understand God, but, sometimes I place false hopes in people. Sometimes I place false hopes in family. Sometimes I place false hopes in organizations or governments or committees or anything else. You can do that. You can put, reasonable hopes sometimes. But what happens when your hopes are broken and shattered? This can destroy a person, right? You hope for somebody to help with a favor and they don't do it. That can mess us up. If the individual believes and knows for certain that Allah is the source of all khair, then nothing can disturb him. There will be no stress in his life. Because he'll say that, okay, my source is Allah, my hopes for khair go to him. So whenever something takes place, then I know that this is exactly what Allah had predicted and designed, and that's what's supposed to happen, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The second thing to keep in mind about this is Ya man arjuhu li kulli khair. That we have this raja, we have this hope in every khair. Now, for those of you who are paying attention to the Arabic, it's not saying Ya man arjuhu li kulli khairi. It's not saying I am hopeful and I put all my hopes in Allah, who is the one that gives me all my khair. It's just saying all khair, kulli khair. Not my khair, all of my good khair, and the things that are good for me, but all khair, without any condition. So what is that second point for us to think about? We need to start thinking differently about our du'as, about our hopes too. Sometimes our hopes are, as we mentioned before, very personal. I hope for a vaccine. Or it could be negative. I hope that this person doesn't get a vaccine or whatever. Right? Sometimes we direct our hopes in this manner. I hope I get it before this person does because I think I deserve it more. I hope that this person doesn't become successful. I hope I become successful. The question is this: why is it that even in our du'as, we end up becoming very egotistical? Very, just it's all about me. Do we think that we're the only creations of Allah? That we're the only ones that Allah has, set His sights on in the month of Rajab, and that's it? I'm going to make my dua for my khair, and that's it, I'm done? And on the other side, if I make dua for something, a legitimate dua, and it doesn't come to me, does that give me a right and a reason to get upset? Like, it didn't happen to me. I made dua, I thought I was one who was, let's say, sicker than everybody else. I should have gotten the vaccine. Why did so-and-so individual get it? That's not fair. Do you really think that Allah, who is in charge of everybody's destinies, who understands everybody's situations, somehow overlooked you, that you were the actual deserving better one, and gave it to this other person accidentally? So this first part of the dua seems to be asking us to rethink, recall, figure out what kind of Allah you're calling to. Are you really calling to an Allah from an egotistical, nafsani point of view? Or do we want to now shift our dua to become more communal? As we have the famous hadith, the famous advice and saying from Sayyidah Fatima, alayha salatu wasalam. Ajjar thumma dar. First we make dua for our neighbors, for those around us, and then we do it for our own self. So it doesn't have to be literal. You can think about it in this way, that Allah, you are the one who is in charge of all khair. So when I'm making dua, yeah, some of it might be personal, of course. We want to make sure we do that. But at the same time, Allah, I also want to make sure that if I make a dua, I don't want it to interfere with somebody else's khair as well. If I make a dua for an increase in business, let's say it does happen, I don't want that to be at the expense of somebody else who may need it more than me. If that means I take a hit, okay, Allah give me the tawfiq and the sabr so I can handle it. But if there's somebody, and there's probably always going to be somebody more deserving, more in need than me, I want you to make sure that their khair is taken care of before my khair is taken care of. And that's why this first part of the dua is perhaps trying to help us reorient ourselves. In the month of Rajab, it's the month of mercy. Allah's mercies is pouring down like rain, as we were mentioning on Thursday. Remember that that rainfall is for everybody, not just for you and I as individuals. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And the last point, and there's a few other points I wanted to mention, but maybe we'll have to end here. The last point is this. The key here for our hopes is this. Sometimes we end up hoping in things, and it may not actually be in our khair. And because we had this hope in something, we get our hearts broken, our morale gets shattered at the end of the day, right? We hope that a situation would turn out this way, and it doesn't. What perhaps this first line is helping us think about also is that, look, nothing is in our control. Or the concept that we have of tafweed, right? Tafweed. Tafweed literally can be translated as delegation. Not that you give up everything. It's not that, Allah, I'm not going to do anything and you just take care of everything. No. Tafweed is something different. Tafweed is one of the pillars of Iman, according to the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. In fact, he says that there's 4 main pillars for Iman. He says, Al-Iman lahu arba'atu arkan. There's 4 arkan and rukns for Iman. First is tawakkul ala Allah, having a tawakkul and true trust. Then the second is what? Tafweed. Tafweed al-amr ilallah. Every single amr, every single issue that comes up, you delegate that towards God. And let me mention the other 2 just to complete the narration, then we'll go back to tafweed. The other 2 are rida bi qada'illah, right? Being happy with Allah's decisions, and taslim li amrillah, doing taslim and completely submitting to whatever Allah decides. So they're all related, but specifically we want to talk about the idea of tafweed and control. Now this does not mean you do nothing. It doesn't mean that if you want a vaccine, it's just going to magically, needle's going to fall from the heavens and come into your arm. That's not how it works. You have to put in the effort, as we see in these WhatsApp groups, like kind of every 5 minutes, like there's messages being sent. Everybody's trying and sending these messages and signing up, right? Everybody's putting in the effort. Well, that's what you have to do. You put in the effort. We don't have this concept that some other faiths may have of just let God take care of everything. No. God says, I'm giving you an aql. I'm giving you consciousness. I'm giving you awareness. I've given you a mind, a body. I've given you the tools. You have to go get up. Just like we said, raja is when you put in the effort. If it's something khair, you have to go and do the work. Do the work. If it's good for you, then I'm going to do it. Then I'll take care of it for you. If you're one of my mu'mineen, you've gone through the steps that you need to, then I'm going to make the best decision possible for your life. Allah can't do anything else. It's not in His nature. He can't do evil. He doesn't do dhulm. He doesn't oppress. The only thing that Allah manifests and does is khair. That's the only thing He's capable of doing. So this level of tafweed, what we can reorient ourselves with this dua, this first part is saying that, Allah, you are the source of all khair. So if I'm going after something, I put in my reasonable effort, I did what I had to, submitted the forms, went to the interviews, did everything. Whatever the conclusion, the result is, that has to be khair. There's no other option. If I did my due diligence, if I did what I had to do, according to Islamic principles, I sought advice, I did whatever I had to, and this is the result, even if it's not what I thought it was, that means that I didn't know what was khair for me. Allah, you know what is khair for me. Ya man arjuhu li kulli khair. You are the one that all of my hopes come to you for every khair. I don't put my hopes in myself. I don't put my hopes in others. I don't decide what I should be hopeful in. My hope is completely towards you, and I let you decide what will be the end result and conclusion of my life. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So inshallah, we will continue with the next lines in our next session, which I believe will be Thursday night, inshallah ta'ala. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So tonight we are commemorating the Shahadah of our 10th Holy Imam, Imam Ali ibn Muhammad al-Hadi al-Naqi alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We know that within the lives of all of the ma'sumin, there was always this driving factor of khawf and raja. Both of these factors were always present. especially for somebody like the 10th Imam, like Imam al-Hadi, like Imam al-Naqi. Imagine, with the knowledge that he was granted by Allah, imagine the raja and the hope that he would have had, and knowing that his grandson is going to be the Mahdi. Imagine. Perhaps maybe he even may have had the hope that he would have been able to meet his grandson. Maybe. At the same time, that same piece of information, for those who are connected to Allah, those who are after the truth, this is something that is a source of raja and hope. But for those who are the enemies of Islam, those who are munafiqeen and hypocrites, those who are zalimeen and oppressors, this actually is a source of khawf for them. And this is what we saw with the Abbasid Khulafa. The Abbasids knew, many of them were Shia, in theology, right? In their heads, not in their hearts, not in their soul. They believed in imamah, in wilaya. But unfortunately, the greed of the dunya got the best of them. And that's why they knew exactly what was going to happen. They knew. This stuff was foretold from the time of the Prophet. They knew exactly that there was going to be somebody coming that was going to cause an end to their reign and take away all their power. This is why we see one after the other, each Abbasid Khalifa was trying their best to ruin and torment the lives of the Ahlul Bayt. Oppressing the Shias, torturing them, imprisoning them, massacring their families. Unspeakable, disgusting acts. And the way they treated their imams. We know that especially our beloved Imam, Imam al-Hadi, had a very, very difficult life. 30 years he spent in his home in Medina, and then he was forced away into Samarra. He's under house arrest. They try to keep him away from many of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. He's under constant surveillance. He's suffering through surprise raids, through searches in the middle of the night. No warning, nothing. They just come busting through his house and they destroy everything just to see if they can find, in hopes of finding something that will show them that this person's plotting against the Abbasid Khalifa. And they never found anything. Over and over again, they'd be harassing him. And of course, the hate by the Abbasid Khulafa, when it reached the Khalifa Mu'taz, this is where he couldn't take the personality of the Imam anymore, and he ordered that the Imam be poisoned. And they say that the Imam suffered with this very severe and extreme poison. And the other side of this torment was that Imam al-Askari had to watch his father on his deathbed suffering through this poison in the last moments of his life, slowly destroying and taking away the life of his father. So much of the musibah and masa'ib of the Ahlul Bayt, and especially of this Imam, is just like his forefathers. Right? He was taken away, Imam al-Hadi is taken away from his home. He's taken away from his family. He's taken away from his Ahlul Bayt and supporters in Medina. Just like Imam al-Rida was taken away and brought to Khurasan. In the same way, when Imam al-Hadi was poisoned and given this very severe poison, in the same way we remember our beloved Imam Hasan. The poison was so shadeed in his body, they say that he was coughing up pieces of his liver. And they say that the severity of the poison of this Imam was just like this too. It was eating up at his organs and destroying his body from the inside. At his final moments, he was with his son. He was with Imam al-Askari. The Imam performs his ghusl. He performs the kafan. He puts on the kafan. He does the dafan. And he performs salah over the body of his father. Now we say, yes, Ya Imam, you've gone through all these trials and tribulations. It's been very, very difficult for you in your life. But we say to you, in your last moments, you are with your son. In your last moments, Imam al-Askari is there. He's there to wash your body. He's there to put a kafan on your body. He's there to do the proper burial rites. He's there to pray over your body. But we say, what about your grandfather Hussein? As he is all alone on the battlefield, there's no one there to cover his body. There's no one there to wash his body. No one. Even Imam knew this and said, he asked the kids of Banu Asad, please, when you go and play out in the battlefield of Karbala, just throw some dirt on my body. That's all I ask of you. Imam was so madloom, he had to ask little children to throw dirt on his body. Imam al-Hadi, you also had the benefit of being with your son in your last moments. You have the benefit right now. You are buried in your home. We can come visit your home. It's a dhari right for you right now. But what about your grandmother Sakina? When we want to go and visit her, where is she buried? Was she able to go back to her home? When we want to go and visit our Sakina, we have to go to the prison where she was kept held. She was buried in her very own prison. There is no madlumiyah more than that. على لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد.
یا علی النکی یا علی النکی عزیزو کیا غضب آیا نکی جگ سے اٹھا افسوس شہنشاہ دو عالم وہ اٹھا جگ سے ہزار افسوس عزیزو کیا غضب آیا نکی جگ سے اٹھا افسوس نبی مرکد میں روتے ہیں علی جنت سے آئے ہیں کھلے سرفا ماں پوتے کو رونے یہاں پہ آئی ہے عزیزو کیا غضب آیا نکی جگ سے اوس کرو ماتم سبھی مل کے قیامت ہوئی ہے عزادارو دیا ظالی مونے ہے زہر شہ کو اے عزادارو عزیزو کیا غضب آیا نکی جگ سے یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین راج دلارا زہرا کا زخمی ہے اور پیاسا ہے راج دلارا زہرا کا زخمی ہے اور راہ خدا میں جلدی کی آگے جانے والوں نے صبح کے ساتھی چھوٹ گئے شام ہوئی اب تنہائی راج زخمی ہے اور اے اکبر و قاسم کوئی نہیں آس بندے تو کس سے بندے دریا چھیننے والا بھی دریا چھین کے سویا ہے راج زخمی ہے اور خون کی ندی ایسی چڑھی صبح سے لے کر شام تلک چاند نبی کے ڈوب گئے سورج ڈوبنے والا ہے راج دلارا زخمی ہے ہائے بجھ گئے شم میں قبر نبی دشت بلا کیا روشن ہے بیچ میں خیمے جلتے ہیں چاروں طرف اندھیارا ہے راج زخمی ہے موت یہ تیری کیسی تھی مرنے والا تیرے لیے مجلس بستی بستی ہے ماتم سہرا سہرا ہے زخمی ہے اور پیاسا ہے راج دلارا زخمی حسین شہید کربلا وویلا حسین امام مظلوم وویلا حسین غریب نینوا وویلا رحم اللہ سورة المبارکة الفاتحة
Refreshments will be served at the gate along with the tabarak niyaz to go. Refreshments will be served at the gate with the niyaz to go package. Ziyarat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma kulli waliyika al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. Salawatuka alayhi wa ala abaihi. في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك طوعا وتمتيه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام علیکم یا ابا عبداللہ السلام علیکم یا ابن رسول اللہ السلام علیکم یا امیر المؤمنین مسعود وسین السلام علیکم یا فاطمۃ الزہرا سید نساء العالمین السلام علی الحسین وعلی علی ابن الحسین وعلی اولاد الحسین وعلی اصحاب الحسین جميعا ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. السلام علیکم یا مولا ابن مولا السلام علیکم یا غریب غربا او سلطان ابو الحسن مولانا علی بن موسیٰ رضا كن شفيانا وشفيا والدينا في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أصحاب الأجر والزمان سيدي ألمان ألمان ألمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان أجر الله فرجك وسخر الله مخرجك وزهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته.